I am now a retired special education professor. I retired from the University of Texas at Austin, where I was a faculty member in the multicultural special education program and directed the Office of Bilingual Education. And so my career has spanned both special education and bilingual education and English as a second language fields. I started out as a speech and language pathologist, worked in the deep south side of San Antonio, and then went back and got my doctorate and took my first job at San Jose State University. This is in the mid-70s, where I was a special education faculty member, but had the opportunity to become the director of the bilingual education teacher training program. And because all of my training was in special education, I had to go about the business of learning about bilingualism, which was kind of interesting because I grew up in a home where Spanish was the primary language spoken. My mother is 104 and doesn't speak English to this day. But what was really beneficial for me was that even though I had grown up as a bilingual child, I didn't really have any understanding of what that meant. And so once I went into the bilingual education classrooms and saw the kind of instruction children were getting and began to study the field, I was able to reflect back on my own practices and realize that you can be bilingual, and that's an important characteristic when you work with English language learners, but that's not enough. You also have to have some knowledge associated with it. So I could think about the fact that as a speech pathologist, I had been trained to assess students in English. And so when I became a speech therapist, that's exactly what I did. I tested all these Spanish-speaking children in English, and lo and behold, they qualified as having articulation and language disorders. And so I put them on my special education rosters. And 3 years later, I dismissed them thinking I had done a really excellent job. But once I learned about the field of bilingual education and how children acquire a second language, I realized that all that had happened was the passage of time. And so the kids were doing better because they now spoke more English and they could pass the tests that I had been giving them. So then I spent really the rest of my career trying to understand the interaction between language proficiency, cultural differences, academic progress, and how students wind up in special education because educators don't understand when they're looking at language differences or cultural differences versus when they're looking at disabilities. So my movement into the special education field was probably one of the best things that happened to me professionally. And it also highlighted that we do such a poor job of preparing educators for the reality of students and their experiences in schools, particularly when language and cultural differences are a big part of their life.